What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our... I'm getting an echo back from RBN. I guess it's gone now. Okay. Little technical gremlins that we're dealing with here. It's Friday, June 17th. 2016. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick reminder, the lovely lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 today with her unique perspective on the world. I'm going to be teasing a couple of the stories because they're really important, but we'll go into them a little more depth when Claire is in the chair back behind me. Now, getting on down to Orlando, this official story is falling apart. And I think part of the reason is everybody is trying to grab hold of the bloody shirts for their own particular agenda, and how it's coming across to the public is simply that it's mass confusion. Is it Islamic terror? Is it homophobia? Is it prescription medications? Is it the fault of the Christians? Is it the fault of the Florida state government? It's blah, 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 blah. And in the sheer and utter chaos, none of the propagandists can create a sense of focus as to what's going on, except, of course, Barack Obama is out there, terror, 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 which he's been saying before anybody knew anything about what had happened. It was a preordained outcome. We're going to call this terrorism. And he actually weakened himself rather badly, because the American people have an image of a president as thoughtful, deliberative, not rushing into anything, weighing all the available facts and evidence before coming to a decision, and Barack Obama failed to live up to that image. He was just out there saying, oh, it's terror. Absolutely, it's terror. It's got nothing to do with the refugees. It's homegrown terror. We got to take your guns away. It's homegrown terror. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's not working out. And it doesn't help when you go on out there with these extreme claims that are so easy to shoot down. Because one of the claims being put on out there is there are 30,000 gun deaths in the United States every single year. And Emily Miller, a reporter for WTTG, did point out 20,000 of those deaths are due to suicide, and if they don't have guns, they'll find something else to do. And again, there's that problem of how many innocent Americans are being gunned down by the police departments, because those police departments are murdering more innocent Americans than all the mass shooters put together, and nobody talks about that. And something else they're not talking about, as Obama says, oh, all these guns flowing into our society, crime and murder is going up. Actually, according to the FBI, the current U.S. homicide rate is at a 51-year low, because if somebody intending ill thinks there's a realistic possibility that the home they are invading or the business that they're invading might have a gun and can shoot back, basically they're going to go someplace else. That's the reality. More guns means less crime. Look at the example set by Kennesaw, Georgia, all those years ago. Now, the latest claim, they're trying to drag Omar Mateen's ex-wife in and prosecute her. We've got to have a trial to keep the media interest going. And now, of course, CNN's out there said that Omar Mateen was exchanging text messages with his ex-wife during all of this going on. So the official story right now, is Omar Mateen, while shooting up the Pulse nightclub, called 911, a TV news station, was posting to social media and trading texts with his wife, but still had to be holding his guns or he would have been attacked by the club patrons while he fiddled with his cell phone. So either the official story is a lie or Omar Mateen was actually a space alien with 8 arms. There have been a bunch of videos that underscore the fact this is a wag the dog false flag presentation. The video of the victim being carried turns out toward the Pulse nightclub. The other video of another victim being carried who is immediately put down as soon as they think the camera isn't watching anymore. And the latest one is this interview of this woman supposedly on the scene, and she forgot to take off her eyeglasses. And in the eyeglasses, you can clearly see these large softbox studio lights being reflected. You do not see the sun. You do not see the sky. You don't see anything. Just giving away that it's a manufactured shot on a green screen stage. Now, there's another little weird thing that has turned up. There's a website called Broadcastify. This is a private archiver of radio communications for first responders, public safety, aircraft, rail, marine-related communications. They have every second of the last year of the Orlando and Orange County Emergency Services transmissions except for last Saturday night. The recordings are gone. Golly gee whiz, they must have been on Lois Lerner's hard drive or something. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Nathan in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Nathan, are you there? Okay, I do not hear Nathan, so we're going to move. Okay, he dropped. All right. Interesting little statistic somebody put on out here. This is an Investment Watch blog. Why are mass shootings up 700% under Barack Obama? Is it a coincidence? I don't think so. And I joke about this little graphic I have about how many more people do we have to kill? I mean, how many people have to die before you will give us your guns and so forth and so on. And Barack Obama literally came out today with some bizarre statements. And this appeared over in the Standard in Great Britain. The U.S. will suffer more massacres like Orlando unless gun laws are tightened. He literally came on out and said, there are going to be more massacres until you give us your guns. That's it. I mean, he's basically tipped the whole idea of what's going on. This is an attempt at general population disarmament. Now, the Senate Republicans are bowing to Obama's will, and they've already voted through 2 gun control measures, the one that says no fly, no buy, and universal background checks. Here's the problem. Omar Mateen was not on the no-fly list. And he not only passed a normal background gun check, he had a state of Florida gun license. Plus, he passed 2 background checks for G4S, and the FBI investigated him twice. And nothing happened. What's going on here is they're going to pass a bunch of gun laws which aren't going to disarm the criminals and the terrorists, and they'll say, oh, well, we've got to have more gun laws to disarm the law-abiding citizen, and they won't work either. So they'll say, well, we've got to have more gun laws to take guns away from the law-abiding citizens, which will not disarm the criminals and the terrorists, because they're not interested in disarming the criminals and the terrorists. They need them to scare you into surrendering your right to self-defense, which is really what it all comes down to. And here's a point that needs to be made. Those people at the Pulse were not targeted because they were gay. They were targeted because they were disarmed. Go back and look at all these mass killings the gun grabbers love to wave at you. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Aurora, Newtown, Charleston, San Bernardino, Orlando. All took place in gun-free zones. They should rename them killing zones, because that's what they are. They're giant open-air shooting galleries for anybody with an agenda or too many prescription psychiatric medications. When a crime or act of terror is happening, only the perpetrators and the victims are there. And if you truly want to stop terror and crime, you have to allow the victim their right to self-defense. Common sense says the Second Amendment provides to us our right to have weapons equal to, if not superior to, those in the hands of the criminals. And the U.S. government has been giving military weapons to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Mexican drug cartels. All right, I understand Nathan is back. Nathan, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi. Just a quick thing on Orlando. I've watched quite a few truther videos, and just 3 quick examples. This Louis Bourbano, he claims he saw a guy with a 2-inch bullet sticking out of his leg, and that means maybe, 1 inch was still inside it, and that makes it about the length of a big lighter. And this guy, Christopher Hansen, he claims his hands were soaked with blood. And, the video I saw, he's with 5 other people heading towards the pulse, and there's no blood on his hands. And
yeah.
the last one, this guy is given kind of a news conference in the hospital. He claims a bullet missed his head and hit his hand. And when you look at the video carefully, there is no mark on his hand, either one of them, nothing. So in my opinion, I don't believe that Omar was there. I don't believe anybody died. I think it's a total hoax.
Paul Craig Roberts is actually on board with you on that. He thinks it's just all completely made up, wag the dog from beginning to end. Now, Omar Mateen was definitely there, and somebody shot him so the body could be found. But he was set up as a patsy.
What evidence do you have that Omar was actually there and not in Brazil in a 3-bedroom condo drinking expensive beer and laughing his rear end off?
They had to have a body.
Got a big fat bank statement.
Yeah, well, they had to have the body. Besides which, when you have somebody set up as a patsy like that, if they're allowed to live afterwards, that's a live liability. And that's why in all these mass shootings or terror attacks, the patsies have to be killed so they can't contradict the official story. The only exception to that was Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who was supposed to be killed inside that boat, and somebody slashed his throat with a knife. Nobody will say who. But he has survived, but, they gave him a defense lawyer who walked in, told the jury he's guilty, lock him up, and we'll never hear from him again. Even though, if I'd been allowed into that courtroom, I could have gotten him off by showing the reasonable doubt, because the backpack with the bomb was black with a recognizable white patch on top. The photos of the Tsarnaev brothers at the location, one's wearing a white backpack, the other one's got a gray backpack. And then we've got these strange guys with these black jackets and khaki slacks when they're standing together. It's obviously a uniformed group. One of them has a black backpack with a white patch on the top before the bombing. After the bombing, photo of the same guy without the backpack. That right there is reasonable doubt. And could have acquitted him. And his lawyer would not look at that. Literally went in and told the jury, yes, he's guilty. And it's a kangaroo trial. It's a fake. It's an absolute fake from beginning to end. We don't need to argue over the fine details. We all know we're being lied to. So let's just agree on that. We're being lied to once again by the government.
I can't.
And we agree that we're being lied to by the government and decide what we're going to do about that. Okay? So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back here, there's an article coming out of David Stockman, ContraCorner.com. And I thought my domain was a little too long for practicality here. And he's got an article that says right on out, how to stop most homegrown terrorists, shut down those FBI sting operations. We have former FBI agents coming out and saying that most of the terror attacks and mass shootings in this country are being created by the FBI to get in the newspapers to sell the propaganda. And they go out and they find somebody who is vulnerable, somebody with mental illness, somebody on prescription antidepressants, and they talk them into doing this. Then they swoop in for the arrest, or they let them carry it out and kill them after the fact. That's what they're doing. By the way, the reference to Wag the Dog, if you have not seen that movie, it's funny, it's wonderful, and it's educational. I'm sure it's still out there someplace on Netflix or Hulu, and it's Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro. It's got a major, major cast, and it basically shows how government manipulates the public perception. Now, meanwhile, the gun grab screeching is having exactly the opposite effect. AR-15s are flying off the shelves right now. Especially, gays, lesbians, all those other various gender identities, they're buying weapons and arming themselves for self-defense, and they should. They should. The Florida SWAT did not intervene in that shooting for 3 whole hours. Now, somebody that we ought to be worried about having guns is the government itself. because there's a very alarming article over in TaxProf basically pointing out that the number of non-Defense Department federal officers that are allowed to carry assault weapons and make arrests, carry firearms, now is larger than the number of U.S. Marines. The federal government is arming up. They're creating their own little federal army that's outside the military chain of command and answerable only to the executive branch. That's very, very, very dangerous situation. Maybe. Maybe not. We know how eager civil service workers are to do their job. You know, they're just plodding along and collecting their money. I think when push comes to shove, the vast majority of those government workers are not going to risk their lives to protect their bosses from an enraged American mob. I think we're going to see most of them run like heck. And then we'll pick up all those weapons, and after it's all over, we'll sell them surplus under the slogan, never fired, only dropped once. Now, here's a question everybody's talking about. This is over in the Daily Bell. Apparently, WikiLeaks has put out an encrypted safety file. They've done this before, where supposedly all of the new Hillary emails are now available for people to copy. You can't look at them because they're encrypted, and at some point in the future, they're going to release the password. They're trying to create a dead man switch so that there isn't a drone strike on WikiLeaks servers. Or maybe they're just holding out for a higher extortion payment or something. I don't know. We'll see when and if this stuff really comes out. But there are articles saying, will Hillary survive the barrage of email leaks from Russia and WikiLeaks? And it's kind of interesting because over the last 24 hours, they were saying the DNC servers were allegedly hacked by Russia. Now, allegedly has gone away, even though the hacker who did it has gone public. Now, they don't know who it is, but he's not Russian. He calls himself Guccifer 2, and it's just one guy. It's not a big plot, but the media is still out there bashing Russia, and Hillary's bashing Russia. It's all how, Hillary is taking the position of, it's not my fault for having a weak, unsecure server. It's obviously Russia is the villain here, and you should be angry with them and not with me. Well, if Hillary had been playing by the rules, we wouldn't be in this mess, would we? Now, Richard Benveniste actually came out with an editorial in USA Today saying it's a non-scandal. Everybody was sending classified material through non-secure emails, and the reality is the State Department computers aren't all that secure, and so he's just trying to make this go away as hard as he can. But the one issue he did not address, and I did add it as a comment to his article at USA Today, is Chinagate 1996. The Clintons have a past history of selling U.S. secrets in exchange for donations. In 1996, it was donations to Bill Clinton's re-election campaign. Today, it's donations to the Clinton Foundation. And certainly, there is that possibility out there. And if you're going to justify taking guns away from everybody because of what they might be doing, then you need to apply that same logic and say you have to investigate Hillary for spying because she had the capability and the means and the motive and a past history of doing that. Why aren't you doing your job over there in the corporate media and the FBI? The FBI is supposed to be looking for spies. It's amazing here. Alrighty, let's see. We're coming up on a commercial break. We got a phone call waiting on the line. I'm going to wait until after the commercial break to take that. Meanwhile, apparently some of the newly leaked emails from Hillary Clinton confirm that the Democratic National Committee and the corporate media were working together trying to swing the election to Hillary Clinton. So that actually did happen. More about that when Claire is joining us on the show. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right to the phones here. Brendan in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael. Haven't called in a while. Thankfully, I've been back to work, which has allowed me to make a small donation to you folks to keep the lights on for another day or so.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate what you're doing. So listen, I'll try to make it quick, Mike. So I'm very thankful for your show and getting to listen and get up to speed on a lot of the things, the current events, and I'm hoping that we can make an evolution to the next step where we might be able to start volunteering thoughts and ideas of what we can do to stem some of these activities that are being perpetrated by this illegal government. And, for example, one small idea I had was to go to a local printer like Kinko's and start printing off small flyers that are just like, almost like cliff notes for friends and family about the New World Order, Agenda 21, PNAC, something of that nature, because I've been trying to express some of these things to folks, and they are very resistant.
Yes.
In fact, I've been getting in arguments with my girlfriend, etc. And I happen to live just 2 blocks from what is considered the gay capital of Northern California. And a lot of folks came out in support of the victims of that so-called mass shooting. I'm curious to see how many people are actually killed by the police. And also with that in mind, is there any video of the surrounding stores, like the donut shop or whatever? I mean, these things should be coming out by now, don't you think?
They should be, but they aren't. And again, nobody that claims to have received a phone call from Omar Mateen is willing to part with an audio file. The police are still refusing the Freedom of Information Act request. The TV news station, their attitude is basically just trust us. We know it was him. He was speaking Arabic, which in itself is kind of suspect. The guy was born in New York and grew up in the United States. His parents' language was Pashtun, not Arabic. And so, again, I think somebody got on the phone pretending to be Omar and threw some Arabic in there to make it look like Middle Eastern Islamic radicals and sell that whole terrorism thing. They really botched this one up kind of bad. They were trying to hit too many political hot buttons at the same time, and it's just coming across to the public like mush.
Well, listen, I'm really proud of my gay brothers and sisters in North Hollywood. They actually came out, I don't know if you've seen this, with the Don't Tread on Me flag, banded with their rainbow flag, and
I want one.
We shoot back. Excuse me?
I said I want one. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We shoot back. Yeah, that's a good hashtag. We shoot back. We have a right to shoot back.
I immediately wanted to volunteer my efforts to get people to come to our local gun clubs. We have a beautiful outdoor range down in Silicon Valley. Los Altos Rod and Gun Club, and just get these folks familiar and comfortable with weapons and turn the tables on this New World Agenda, which I'm telling you, man, I have faith in humanity because people are waking up thanks to shows like yours and others.
Well, thank you very much for that. And by the way, I'm reposting my own Right to Keep and Bear Arms article to the front page of What Really Happened after the cache clears in a couple of minutes. You may find some material in there that would be suitable for inclusion in brochures or pamphlets or leaflets or emails. These days, print is in decline, and you're going to be more effective in the online world. But these are some really good arguments here that you can. And I understand the arguments with your girlfriend. There are still a lot of people who do not want to face up to what this government has become, because then they have to choose whether they're going to do something about it or not. And to choose not to do something about it in the face of a corrupted government means they have to surrender their own self-image of being a courageous, moral person who would fight for justice. And they're just going to have to admit to themselves, I'm a slave, I'm beaten down. Yeah. Well, only do a little. Okay.
People need to look at Building 7 and start there and work their way back. My girlfriend, for example, Stanford grad, works for the government, and her.
Oh, well, that right there, that tells you, if she's working for the government. Anyway, Brendan, got to take a break for commercials here. I'm going to have some replies to you when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And for the benefit of Brendan and for anybody else who's out there trying to share what they know with people and they're meeting resistance, I'm going to share a couple of insights with you. First of all, one of the ways any dictatorship controls its people is by tricking the people into defining their own identity as being part of that government. I am an American. I am a Republican. I am a Democrat. You become that which is being believed in. It's a very, very, very old trick. And so people whose assumptions about government are challenged, their minds actually interpret it as a personal insult. And you have to be very, very careful of that minefield. The real art of being a rabble-rouser is knowing what the rabble is ready to listen to and what they are not, and know where that line is. And it's got to be a little bit at a time. Start with something that nobody can really refute. They lied to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons. And open the door that way. And you're never going to shove them across that bridge to the truth. They'll dig in their heels. You have to stand on the other side and lure them forward a little bit at a time. And let's be very honest. If somebody is working for the government, it's a waste of time to talk to them. People in government get paid anywhere between 30 and 50% more than people in the private sector doing the exact same job. And it's almost impossible to fire them. They get to sit around looking at porn on their taxpayer-funded computers, and nothing ever happens to them. The government is literally buying the loyalty of its own employees. So it's a waste of time to talk to them. Unless they approach you and say, I've got doubts, then, have a little conversation. But little tiny doses, a little bit at a time. Don't overwhelm people or their defensive mechanisms are going to kick in. So you have one discussion about one thing, and you let them go away and think about that. Again, start with Saddam's nuclear weapons, or Building 7, and then bit by bit lead them forward until they begin to understand that lies by government to the people are not rare, they are not scandalous, they are not unique, they are not shocking. It is business as usual. And when you reach the point where somebody starts arguing with you, that's the time to stop. Don't turn it into a contest of egos. Don't need to prove you're right to them. Just give them something to think about and let them go away. And I got to tell you, these days, I get lots and lots of email from people that I had talked to decades ago. And they're writing to say, it turns out you were right. So it may take time to win them over. Be patient. Brendan, are you still there on the line, or did you hang up? Okay, we're going to switch to Brian in New York. Aloha, Brian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, I've been following this whole thing with you and, looking at the corporate media and everything. And, by the way, bravo to that previous caller. That was great what he was talking about. I've been reading that President Obama has assigned to the head of the Homeland Security to start grabbing our guns. And I was thinking about that, along with what you're saying, that the only really way to do that is a change of amendment, which is like almost impossible. But isn't going after guns not the government's jurisdiction? Isn't that be more with states making rules and regulations as far as going after guns?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, going after guns from law-abiding citizens is flat out unconstitutional. And as we have seen time and time and time again, disarming the law-abiding citizen has no effect on crime or terrorism, at least in terms of reducing it. In fact, when you disarm the public, crime goes up. Violent crime goes up. Go back again. Look at all the mass shootings. They all took place in those gun-free zones. If that nightclub down in Orlando had a sign out front saying some of our patrons are carrying concealed, you figure out which ones, it is quite likely the perpetrators of this, tragedy would have just turned around and gone home, done something else. Nobody wants.
I read something that was pretty good. It was they weren't killed because they were gay. They were killed because they were unarmed.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, first of all, I have a real hard time thinking that Omar was there pulling. I think he was there to be killed and left the way they left that Polish gentleman at Gleiwitz. But he went to this club all the time. He was gay himself. He knew these people. Some of them were probably his lovers as well. Even if he was going to do something this dramatic, I think he would have picked some place that was completely foreign to him. But this was his place, and that it just doesn't make any sense.
I agree, Mike. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch to Steve in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, it's a comment you made just a couple of minutes ago about how the government tries to, lump us all together. I'm an American, which I recall a big advertising campaign. It must have been like 5-10 years ago, where they had all these different races on. I am an American. I am an American. There'd be a person from China, person from Japan, person from Mexico, and they would all be saying, I am an American. Do you remember that?
I remember that one, and the whole point of that commercial, of course, was, trying to, start pushing the multiculturalism agenda. Right. What I'm talking about, though, is the indoctrination process that we all go through in those state-controlled schools, where we're given a bunch of beliefs without any proof they're real whatsoever when we're very, very young. So that as we age, our personalities grow up around those core beliefs, and they become a major part of our identity. And beliefs are chains used to hold free mind slaves. No chain of iron or steel ever bound a human being tighter than the chains made out of the beliefs that we're indoctrinated with as children. And it takes a real effort of will to break free of those chains. It can leave you feeling disoriented, suffering an identity crisis. We had a caller who called into the show a while back who described, exactly what he was feeling when it was all going on. And I've been through that experience myself. And any power structure, whether it's the church or government or even corporations, Japanese corporations especially, they want you to identify yourself as part of this larger structure, because that basically brings you firmer into their control. So we all need to start walking away from this idea of seeing ourselves as being these ideas and beliefs that are being given to us. But again, the language is the giveaway. I am a Republican. I am a Democrat. They're going beyond merely supporting a given party's platform. It's their identity. And it's sort of overwhelming their own individual identity, and that's accelerating right now. They're trying to basically crush down our individual identity by getting rid of our cultural history, our regional sense of identity. They just want one mass of uniform people who will believe in the New World Order ultimately, and that's kind of what's going on.
I totally agree. Hey, just to switch channels real quick, think of this theory possibility that the Orlando shooting, that Omar was there, but was actually escaping also, and of course set up by CIA or FBI on this, killed in the parking lot, and basically, strapped on all the stuff, and then they had their scapegoat, they had their patsy. I mean, he could have been there, yeah, he was probably there, but maybe he was fleeing just like everybody else, the ones who carried out the attack. Had their perfect patsy, set him up, and then walk away from it. I mean...
Yeah, that's one possibility. I think another possibility is there's growing suspicion that Omar Mateen was working with some undercover FBI informants, which we know have this long history of faking these attacks, and he may have gone down there with his FBI handlers thinking something else entirely different was going to happen. And then all of a sudden... he realizes he's the patsy and he's being set up. It's like with the London 7/7 bombing. And we found out that just days before the bombing, somebody was going through the local Muslim neighborhood hiring Muslims to be actors for the security drill. And, one of the people had a brand new baby. That's not the sort of person who blows themselves up. And so they were recruited, he needed money, he was a vulnerable person, and somebody said, all right, here's what we're having a security drill. You're going to pretend to be a terrorist carrying a bomb in your backpack. Here is the fake bomb in the backpack. Don't shake that. Don't drop it. Just wear it and go through the exercise, and when it's all over, we'll pay you. And then all of a sudden, the bomb turns out to be real. That's how these people can be set up for these things.
Yeah, that sounds like a very likely scenario. It really does. I'm sure this was a false flag. Sure of it. Thanks,
absolutely. And again, as I told that other caller, don't get suckered into arguing over fine details. They don't matter. The one thing we all agree on, we're being lied to by the government yet again. Let's agree on that and decide what we're going to do about that. Mike in Orlando. No, Mike in Brazil. I'm sorry, I misread the thing. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm Mike from Brazil.
You're Mike from Brazil. I was misreading.
Thanks for taking my call, Mike.
More
listen,
coffee.
I have a question.
More coffee.
I was wondering, given that we have this overwhelming evidence that these were indeed false flags, isn't it possible to have a congressional or independent investigation into these false flags where we can prove beyond any doubt, any reasonable doubt, that the government or elements within the government engineered these attacks for the sole purpose to ban firearms or firearm ownership by the civilian population, disarm the entire nation, as Brazil has done in 2003. And in Brazil, statistics show that crime has gone through the roof exponentially 5 years after the gun ban went into effect.
Same exact thing with Great Britain, same exact thing with Australia here. Now, you're never going to get Congress to conduct an honest investigation. Congress has shown itself repeatedly to be part of the problem. In fact, are you familiar with one of the original Monty Python sketches, The Argument Clinic? Because you need to go back and watch it. It's hilariously funny. And basically, that's the way the U.S. government operates right now. It doesn't matter what you say to them. Oh, it's ridiculous. It's nonsense. It's kooky. It's conspiracy theory. But there are independent investigations going on. We're all doing it. We, the people, are becoming our own investigators and analysts. I'm not interested in having government or media do another investigation because it's just going to be another chance for them to polish up the lies a little bit more. You know, we can look at the facts for ourselves.
What it is like to live in a country where guns are banned and only criminals have guns, because this is the case in Brazil where I live, and I've been living here for quite a while. All walls around the houses are 8 foot tall, and they have shards of glass embedded in the cement of the wall right on top of it to prevent people from jumping over the walls and, commit robberies, home robberies. They have bars on their windows, and after 10 p.m., people won't even dare to go out. By contrast, in Argentina, where I also lived, there are basically gun stores every 2 or 3 blocks you turn, you'll find a gun store. And I'm talking about Buenos Aires, which is the federal capital of Argentina. And everywhere you go, you can buy guns, right? And none of this happens there. They don't have these assaults. They don't have these shootings. They don't have any of this.
No, that's been the pattern throughout history. When the people are armed, the criminals go somewhere else. The criminals in Argentina have moved to Brazil because Brazil has been disarmed for their convenience.
Actually, you just hit the nail right on the head, because I was watching the latest news here. They just caught a bunch of people breaking into homes, all armed, and they were all from Argentina.
Bingo.
They went there, they bought the guns there, and they came back.
Entirely, or they got the guns from America's Fast and Furious program. I mean, that's the part you really...
Mike, if I were to buy a gun right now, okay, if I had the money to buy a gun, I wouldn't even waste one day trying to find it. I can buy it right away. Okay, it'll be illegal. I don't do illegal things, but if I really wanted to buy a gun, I wouldn't have any problem. That's all I can tell all these listeners. That banning guns does not mean eliminating the word firearm from the dictionary. It'll still be there.
Yeah, and as I pointed out before, this killing of Joe Cox in Great Britain, they're saying this was a homemade weapon this guy had. And that right there tells you the disarming the law-abiding American citizen or the law-abiding citizen of any country will not keep guns out of the hands of criminals or terrorists. There'll simply be one more thing the smugglers will bring into the country at a huge markup. I mean, look at the tons and tons of illegal drugs coming into our country. Do you think those smugglers are going to be standing at their airplane and saying, well, I better not take along this AK-47. I could really be in trouble.
Mike, are you familiar? There was a show on National Geographic not very long ago, and there is a group of people hidden in the jungles of Colombia, in any part in the jungles of Brazil, where they literally have arms factories.
Yes.
They manufacture guns, top of the line. I saw it on National Geographic.
There's I saw another similar show where there's this town way out in the hinterlands of India, where all they do is make copies of well-known firearms, and apparently they're very, very good at it. It's not that hard to make a gun.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's just not that hard to make a gun. Even without the 3D printing technology, which is coming online, it's not hard to make a gun.
Collective punishment is terrible because you cannot punish 99% of the population for the misdeeds of 1%.
Well, it's even worse. It's worse here.
Never comprehend this.
It's not collective punishment. They're punishing the 99% of the people and not punishing the 1% who are committing these crimes. And again, all of these gun measures completely failed. Omar Mateen was not on the no-fly list. He'd passed a background check. He'd passed 2 background checks from his employer and 2 FBI investigations.
You know how easy it is to get on a no-fly list? All you have to do, have an argument with a flight attendant, and bingo, you're going to be right there on top of the list.
Well, boy, I'm glad my wife didn't complain about her stolen panties that the TSA took, or she'd be on the no-fly list.
Oh, yeah, it's very easy to get on one of those no-fly lists. I've heard some horror stories of people just having a mild argument with the flight attendant, and in both of these cases, the flight attendant was wrong. And the next time they try to fly, they were put on the no-fly list because of that. They had an argument, and there is no way to get off that list.
Even the government admits 90% of the people on the no-fly list shouldn't be there. And so, once again, they're going to use the no-fly list to disarm innocent people who've done nothing wrong other than to have a disagreement with a fellow human being. And you're not going to have a society where there aren't occasional disagreements. You know, if the stewardess drops a hot cup of coffee in my lap, I'm probably going to say something about it.
I tell you something, Mike. They're trying to disarm segments sequentially, segments of population. First with the vets, then the no-fly lists, then people on whatever drugs, right? And gradually they'll work their way up until you, law-abiding citizen, won't be able to buy a firearm. Regardless of
all right, Mike, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Okay. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of the most alarming approaches, if you will, that is coming out of the gun grabbers is to get a law passed saying anybody who's mentally ill can be denied a firearm. And they're basically relying on the fact that a lot of these mass shootings have been committed by people who are clearly out of their minds, usually from prescription psychiatric medication. But that is a very slippery slope because in their quest to sell more pills and more therapy, the psychiatric industry has literally declared all normal human behavior to be a mental illness of some kind. That diagnostic manual that they all use is almost 1,000 pages long. It even defines the desire to eat safe and healthy food as a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa. In other words, if you refuse to have GMO food, well, we got to take your guns away because you're mentally ill. And by the way, that's an old tactic from the Soviet Union. Anybody who's an enemy of the state, they're mentally ill. Lock them up, don't listen to them, and so forth and so on. All right, we're going to take a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? John, are you there?
Yes, Michael, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Well, it's a Friday. I'm doing pretty good, actually.
I'm looking forward to the lady player. Anyway,
so am I.
If you remember, I think everybody now agrees, as I said on Monday's show, that we don't need to really discuss this Orlando thing too much more. It was an FBI operation. I think everybody knows it.
Well, we know it was a false flag of some kind, and I don't even care, you know, whether it's down to the FBI. I mean, the FBI is working for the executive branch. I mean, at this point, if the government as a whole is lying to us, let's just stop there. We all agree on that. This government is lying to us about everything. Saddam's nuclear weapons, Orlando, Sandy Hook, World Trade Center 7. They're lying to us. What do we do about a government that lies to us this much?
Well, I think people in America, they have this emotional attachment to their government. It's more than... You know,
that's encouraged. Why do you think they make us do that Pledge of Allegiance, you know, every day when we go to school here, just to remind you, you will love the government, you will love the government, you know.
Anyway, so I want to move on to a different subject now. Looking at the so-called nonsense in the South China Sea.
Yes.
I think we should change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of Aggression.
I'm fully on board with that. I'm fully on board with that.
You know, I mean, the arguments I heard from various, if you like, analysts on Russia Today when they were discussing this problem, they never mentioned the fact that America has 800 bases or plus around the world. I mean, Diego Garcia, where they literally shot all the dogs and moved all the people off the island to Madagascar and Africa just to create that base. I mean, if that's not aggression, I don't know what is.
Well, I mean, we know the U.S. is the aggressor. I mean, Russia isn't on our borders. China isn't sailing through the Gulf of Mexico. It's obvious who the aggressors are. We got to take a break for the top of the hour station ID. Thank you for the phone call, John, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And hour number 2, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Couple of interesting stories just arrived here. I'm putting them up at WhatReallyHappened.com about this company, G4S. Now, this is the company the Orlando Patsy worked for. And this company is as dirty as they come. They have a long history of human rights violations. This is the world's 3rd largest private sector employer and commands a force 3 times the size of the British military. And they also landed the contract from the Pentagon to run the Guantanamo Bay prison facility. This is the new academy, the new sea, the new Blackwater. Their business is the government's dirty business, the dirty work. It seems very appropriate here. Now then, interesting little story. You have probably noticed all the violence being directed at Donald Trump and his supporters, and the attitude in the media is, well, you know, it's freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. Apparently, out in Las Vegas, a lady in the audience threw a shoe at Hillary Clinton. Missed her. The aim was off. But throwing a shoe at somebody is understood in the Middle East to be a terrible, terrible insult. And the shoe thrower is now in federal custody because, by golly, when it's a Democrat, you're not allowed to do that. That's not freedom of speech. That's an attempted assassination with a Nike. Now, as you know, there are 2 lawsuits regarding election fraud, one out in California, another one in Ohio. And both lawsuits are saying they have documentation of massive fraud during the Democratic primaries. Stanford University just came out with a study in which they are finding clear evidence of fraud in the Democratic primaries. This is all starting to come apart around the Democrats. Meanwhile, getting back to Donald Trump, apparently ahead of his rally in Dallas, there were all these social media posts from Hispanics and blacks to assassinate Trump. You've got to kill Donald Trump while we still can. He's horrible. He's terrible. Meanwhile, you got a bunch of Hispanics and blacks who are supporting Trump that are basically being ignored by the corporate media. Now, Telemundo had one of their photographers was literally caught staging protests at this anti-Trump rally. The photographer was getting people to say, you stand here and you stand here and you do this and you do that. That's not reporting the news. That's making the news. And there's supposed to be a set of ethical guidelines. The National Press Photographers Association, Code of Ethics. You just record what's going on. You don't tinker. And this Telemundo photographer, when he was caught doing what he was doing, responded with a bunch of profanities. Meanwhile, another reporter was hit in the head by a rock at Trump's Dallas rally. Remember the brown shirts? The brown shirts are the ones who put Adolf Hitler into power by going on out and committing acts of violence against his opponents' rallies. That's what's going on here right now. So you know who is behind it, who is supposed to benefit from it. And apparently there was another major embarrassment for the corporate media where this obvious liberal gentleman was out there trying to silence Trump supporters by telling them to check their white privilege. That's the new buzzword. You're not allowed to talk if you're white. Okay, we're silencing you because of your white privilege, at which point the people being interviewed said, you do know we're of Mexican heritage, right? That's how ridiculous it's getting there. Now, we have been talking about the coming GOP convention and the likelihood they're going to try and get rid of Donald Trump, and they're already talking about Donald Trump supporters cannot be outside the convention hall, which is a violation of their right to freedom of speech. It's also obviously targeting Trump supporters and nobody else, and the ACLU's already filed a lawsuit over that. And the GOP may have right to be very nervous because we are getting word now from governmentslaves.info. The newest plan by the GOP is they're going to change the rules to unbind all the delegates from the primaries. And they're going to try and call it the conscience clause, so that the delegates that are pledged to Donald Trump, if their conscience says he is not a true Republican as defined by that central committee, that they can vote for somebody else on the first ballot. They're just going to change the rules. They're that afraid of Donald Trump, and I don't want to see this, but I think if they do that, it's going to trigger riots. And maybe that's what Obama wants. If there's massive riots at both of the conventions, he can declare a national emergency and call off the elections and say, well, I might as well keep the job for a little while longer because you people just don't know what you want. Actually, we do. And here's where I'm very, very angry with the Republican leadership. And you need to understand, I was born and raised Republican. I consider myself a paleocon. I consider myself a traditional conservative. But those delegates to the convention were elected in a primary system to represent the will of the primary voters. And we have the GOP leadership, just like the Democratic leadership, taking the idea that you voters are not allowed to pick your own candidates anymore. We will choose the leaders. And then you will pick which one of our favorite people. We get to vote between Tweedledum and Tweedledummer every 4 years. The lesser of two evils, which is still evil and a stupid way to be running the country. Meanwhile, over in San Francisco, Board of Supervisors member Eric Marr is saying the political climate is right to grant illegal immigrants the right to vote. These people aren't even supposed to be in the country. And as citizens, they are not supposed to vote. And this Eric is out there saying, yeah, we'll let the illegal immigrants vote. They can just pour on in across the border and vote themselves the country that they want to have at the expense of all the legal citizens. This guy is totally nuts. He's a traitor to the American people. The rules are very clear in this country. You must be a citizen and able to prove it in order to vote in our elections. And isn't it amazing to see a government that's demanding background checks on everybody who wants to buy a gun, but says asking a voter for their ID is racist and exclusionary? All right, let's grab a quick phone call. Joe in Nebraska. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I was just wanting to bring up Trump's possible connection to Israel through Kushner.
Everybody's bringing that up here, but I think Trump has demonstrated his commitment to Israel when he turned Sheldon Adelson's money down flat to make Newt Gingrich his vice president. Okay? I think that's a dead issue. Okay, so thank you very much. Basically, if you go and you read the Israeli media, they want Hillary. Hillary will do everything Israel says. Trump, they're not sure about. They don't want him in that office here. Now, here is a story. I'm going to touch it briefly now. I know Claire wants to talk about this as well. It's a very alarming development. 51 U.S. diplomats have signed an internal memo basically calling for U.S. strikes against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, a decapitation strike. Go after and kill Assad himself. And apparently a draft of this memo was provided to the New York Times by a State Department official saying it's time to go on in and get Bashar al-Assad. Well, that's what they've been trying to do for 5 years. It's not really a civil war. It's another covert attempt at regime change. And they think they've been trying to sell it to you by claiming they're going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We now have those declassified documents proving the U.S. has been secretly supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda against Bashar al-Assad. And since Russia has come on in, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are losing. So now the U.S. is going to turn around and say, well, the best way for us to defeat ISIS and Al-Qaeda is we're going to bomb Bashar al-Assad, who's ISIS' enemy. Russia's already issued a warning, don't try this. And what's alarming about that is that memo that was declassified, confirming that the U.S. government was supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, included the statement, the analysis by the State Department, they were absolutely certain Russia would not dare to interfere. And I'm probably sure they're making exactly the same statement right now, that Russia will not interfere with a decapitation strike against the head of a sovereign nation, which the United States technically is not at war with. There's been no formal declaration of war against Syria itself. The U.S. has been in there trying to bomb Assad. They were claiming Assad was gassing his own people. That turned out to be a lie. They tried the weapons of mass destruction one. That didn't get any traction because of Iraq. Then they planted their little supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda, say, oh, we're not really at war against Syria and Assad. We're there bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but they kept missing ISIS and Al-Qaeda and bombing Syrian infrastructure. Oops, our bad. Our pilots are really lousy shots. Sorry about that. And now they're even giving up that pretense, and they're out there saying, we have to get Assad. We're going to destroy another nation and put it under U.S. puppet rule because, hey, that's what we do. Now, the Iraqi military has retaken Fallujah. Huge victory for them. This is a major whoopsie for the United States, who were hoping that their pet ISIS and inside Iraq was going to hang on to Fallujah in order to lead to this plan to break Iraq into 3 separate parts. And now that's in serious, serious trouble. Basically, the Iraqi aren't listening to the American military anymore. They're not coordinating with them because the Iraqi commanders keep saying every time the American military get involved in operations against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they seem to get in the way more than anything else. But Fallujah is now back in the hands of the people and government of Iraq. So the U.S. war agenda is in serious, serious trouble. Now, South Korea is now carrying out exercises to ward off North Korean aggression. Meanwhile, North Korea is saying they have intelligence that the U.S. is planning an unprovoked attack against North Korea in August, which would obviously be an act of war. I think the rush is on. I think the powers that be are so worried that Trump might actually win the White House, they're going to get World War III going for real and stick him with it. They're not going to give him the opportunity of backing off the war agenda as president. They'll have the war in full-on bloody smoke fire mode. Say, here, we created it, you either win it or lose it. History will judge you. Blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy is deploying even more warships down to the South China Sea. It's really getting very, very ugly. The U.S. is also saying they're going to remain in the Black Sea, despite Russian warning. The United States is building up a military presence in the Black Sea. And I would remind everybody that this is actually a violation of the Montreux Convention that controls military and also commercial traffic in and out of the Black Sea. The U.S. is in violation of international law. And they're out there thumping their chest saying, we're going to be here. What are you going to do about it? I dare you to shoot at us, Putin. I dare you. Please shoot at us. Here's where it could get really, really ugly. The U.S. needs some kind of an event. A new Pearl Harbor, a new USS Maine, a new Lusitania to get the war going and make it look like it's all Russia's fault. And that Black Sea is an ideal situation. Got all these American ships up in there, warships. All they need is a submarine to get up there through the Bosphorus. And they have seen submarines going in and out. and torpedoes one of our own ships and say, how those dastardly Russians, look what they have done now. Yesterday we were reporting on how NATO was bemoaning the fact that they just can't seem to find a lot of enthusiasm in the European Union for a war with Russia, which is understandable when you realize that if you travel around Europe, you will still see the scars from the last two big mistakes. It's very real and very present for them. So now the NATO chief is up in Canada, trying to get Canada to send troops to deter Russian aggression. And they keep repeating that phrase, Russian aggression, in the hope that if they say it loud enough and often enough, that you'll just get tired and say, okay, Russian aggression. Yeah, okay, all right, yes. It's not going to happen. The American people are sick and tired of war. They're sick and tired of being lied into war. And they know they're being lied into another war. And this one is going to be horrendous. It'll be far worse than World War I and World War II put together. It will likely involve nuclear weapons, and it will likely result in the absolute destruction of the United States of America. The Croatian government has just collapsed. The prime minister was ousted after losing a vote of confidence, or whatever they call the equivalent over there. So they're in chaos in Croatia. Europe is in serious, serious trouble. Meanwhile, the ex-Brussels chief is pushing for a European Union army and demanding Europe's leaders work faster to create one, a single, unified European army under the control of Brussels, not under the control of the European Union member states. Why? They may need to invade Britain real soon. Meanwhile, Lockheed, showing that we are, in fact, living in an age of corporate rule, is threatening economic harm to Canada for refusing to buy the F-35. Lockheed Martin is trying to extort one of the most powerful sovereign countries in the world, saying that there'll be 10,000 jobs lost in Canada if the country doesn't buy this piece of junk that does not work. Unfortunately, forcing people to buy bad products has become the new American business model, whether it's the F-35, the F-22, GMO seeds, tainted vaccines, food additives, whatever. That's the new model. We're going to make junk and people will buy it because otherwise we will do bad things to them. So let's talk about the economy real quick. Story coming out of Zero Hedge. 15 facts about the imploding U.S. economy that the mainstream media doesn't want you to see. We're just going to hit the highlights here. Industrial production has declined for 9 months in a row. We've lost our manufacturing. U.S. commercial bankruptcies have risen on a year-over-year basis for 7 months in a row and are up 51% since September. The delinquency rate on commercial and industrial loans has been rising continuously since January 2015. Total business sales in the United States have been dropping since the middle of 2014. They've been in decline for 2 years now. U.S. factory orders are dropping 18 months in a row. The Cass Shipping Index has been falling on a year-over-year basis for 14 consecutive months. U.S. coal production has dropped to the lowest level in 35 years. Goldman Sachs has its own internal tracker of the U.S. economy. It's at the lowest level since the last recession. J.P. Morgan's recession indicators have risen to the highest level seen since the last recession. The Federal Reserve's Labor Market Conditions Index has been falling 5 months in a row. The unemployment numbers that the government released for last month were the worst that we've seen in 6 years, and they were completely fraudulent to begin with. The number of temporary workers in the United States has peaked and started falling again before the recession of 2001 even started. And the media won't report on this. Why? Well, it's an election year. We have to make things look good to protect those incumbents' jobs because these are our friends, and we don't want them to have to look for work next January, especially with the economy the way it is. I mean, you've got to feel sorry for all those members of Congress and let them keep their jobs. I don't think so. They made this mess. They voted us into the slavery of the same predatory banking system we fought a revolution to break free of. They're doing a lousy job. I mean, let's stop thinking about it's the government. Let's remove that mantle of some kind of holiness because they're the government and evaluate them as if we would an employee, which is what they're supposed to be, our employees. Are they doing a good job? No. Time to fire them. Time to find somebody who's going to do a better job as janitor for the nation, because that's really what the federal government's job is, to keep the place neat and tidy and working for those of us who are the owners, the American people. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with a call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're going to go to the phones. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Mike, maybe you can explain something to me. These people who are running our country now, they're mad. These are madmen. I mean, even during the Cold War, I mean, you didn't have crazy people like this, but the missiles would have been flying already. I mean, the Russians today, three things could happen, or they all might happen. One, it starts out localized. The Russians could kick our asses today. Okay, they're more motivated. Putin is very popular there. The Russian army is patriotic today. It's way more patriotic and motivated than it was during the Cold War, because now they feel they have something to fight for. On top of that, if it got out of localized, you could have missiles and planes flying all over the world, bombing Washington, Moscow, London, Berlin, and wherever.
Pearl Harbor.
After that, Pearl Harbor. And after that, of course, the nukes start flying, and then that's it. My opinion is we would probably lose conventionally, and then start firing the nukes. But either way, the losing side is going to start firing those nukes. And those nukes, if anything, are more powerful today than they were. It was Paul Craig Roberts who said the average nuke that they got today is like 17,000 times more powerful than the one that was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Right? What do you think is going to happen to the world if that happens? What is wrong with these people? And what's wrong with the people in this country? I mean, it used to be people who would demonstrate in Europe. Europe was always worried. They should be rioting in the street saying, no, you don't. No, you're not going to get us into a war. I mean,
they're already rioting. They're already rioting in all the streets regarding austerity. I mean, Athens, all over France. I mean, the American corporate media is not covering it all that much because they don't want the American slaves to get uppity ideas.
Yeah, but this is not. I'm talking about rioting over the possibility of war. I mean, this could be
we'll get there.
Extinction for mankind. That's what this could come down to. Now I see that they want to start with Syria again. They want to. I don't know. I just turned you on the last few minutes, so I'm not sure whether you talked about these 50.
Yeah, they're dropping the pretense that this is all about ISIS and Al Qaeda, and they're going back to saying it's time to do a decapitation strike against Bashar al-Assad. Russia's already issued a warning saying don't try that. And again, the State Department escalated Syria, absolutely convinced Russia wouldn't dare to interfere, so they're making some really bad decisions over there at the State Department. They're running on wishful thinking. Yeah, Russia's already issued a warning saying, no, you're not going to attack Bashar al-Assad.
Russia made a mistake. They shouldn't have called for ceasefire. They made a mistake with the Ukraine. They should have let the rebels throw the Ukrainian army out of the entire eastern part of Ukraine. They also made a mistake by giving a chance with the so-called peace with Assad's enemies. The only good.
Well, now wait a minute. Putin understands that he's dealing with an adversary who would welcome an expanded war, and so he's trying to walk a very fine line. First of all, the Syrian ceasefire was actually, came from the United States, and Putin went along with it to try and tap the situation down. He's got a very difficult job. He's trying to bring peace, dealing with an enemy who actually wants the war to escalate and grow. And so he's being very cautious.
The thing is, they had already just about defeated ISIS. Even now, ISIS is on the ropes. They pretty much defeated the al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and whatever else. There's only two sides in Syria that are any good, that are I think, as a matter of fact, very good. One is Assad, the Syrian Arab army. These guys are heroes, the way they're fighting. The other are the Kurds. Other than that, everybody else is a terrorist.
Yes.
Plain and simple. There's no free Syrian army.
No, 90% of them aren't even Syrian. Exactly.
Basically, they became ISIS. That people can't get this through their head. Not called I've called a couple of other talk shows about this. They don't even want to hear it. I keep telling them about Turkey. They don't even want to hear it. Breitbart, to a degree, will listen. And I call this guy Lynn Woolley, who I used to live in Texas. Mm-hmm. I call him once in a while. He's convinced that Assad is a terrible guy, that Putin is the second coming of Stalin.
Okay, well, I need to cut you off. I need to cut you off because we're coming up on a commercial break here. But what's going on here is Putin is playing a waiting game because he knows time is on his side as the American people wake up to what's really going on. And for the U.S. government to drop the pretense ISIS and Al-Qaeda and say, yeah, we're really after Assad, is only informing Americans that that was the goal all along, and we were lied to once again. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And when you are evaluating what's going on between the U.S. and Russia, you need to think above the level of military options and realize that Putin is playing a waiting game. First of all, he is hoping Donald Trump is going to win the White House because Trump has already gone on record saying he wants to go back to being friends with Russia and China, wants to do trade with them, wants to do business, peace through commerce. It's a wonderful idea. Nobody wants a new world war other than the money junkies and the weapons makers. The U.S. government is on board with the war agenda because conquering the world and forcing them to use the U.S. paper dollar is the only thing that's going to, they think, is going to save the U.S. economy, and even then, I don't think it's going to do that. So Putin's strategy has been to play for time, to contain America's aggression and otherwise run out the clock towards the election. And there's a second clock. Putin understands the American people are rapidly waking up to the real agenda behind all these wars. We're tired of the lies. We're tired of the wars. We're coming up on a point where the U.S. government is simply not going to be able to rally the American people into a war with Russia and China. Putin wants pretty much the same thing I want, I think, which is for the U.S. government to simply collapse the way the former Soviet Union did, and then we just restart a new nation. And things will be a lot better, and there will be as minimum of bloodshed. That's what I want. I think that's what Putin wants. We're going to take a phone call. Bob in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Bob, are you there? Hello, Bob.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are. Took a little time for the electrons to percolate over here to Oahu.
Okay. Recently, the Steve Arojo, our state senator here from this area, and another state senator, Mr. Solano, have co-sponsored a bill to fill the transportation funds to fix all the damaged bridges and roadways and everything. Of course, Mr. Solano just happens to be the CEO of Sanzari Construction, which is one of the largest road pavers and bridge menders in the state. But let me date back to 2007 when Mr. Arojo was running against a Democrat, Ed Selby, for a vacated seat in the Senate. Man, Senator Lytle had retired. Mr. Selby was going to, we have the highest taxes, property taxes, income tax, sales tax. Well, we're second to New York City in sales tax and New York State, but all the other taxes add up. Highest auto insurance rates and the like. And they were proposing, the Democrat was going to redo the tax codes. And Mr. Arojo would wave the flag of patriotism, wave the budget, the thick budget that he held in hand, and cut wasteful spending and cut taxes. So I asked the question. I said, when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, we had inflation. The dollar continued to drop. I said, he also got fast-tracked for tariff rates, which Reagan continued into our trade deals. And then Reagan also said they're no longer trade treaties, they're trade agreements, so I don't need two-thirds of the Senate. I only need a simple majority of both houses. And since then, we've had the Maquiladora program, the NAFTA, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the GATT Treaty, and every other treaty. And I said, our our tax base is going down while our dependency on government to support people in unemployment, food stamps, etc., is going up. I said, how are you going to combat that? Well, they both hemmed and hawed, and the other one had an answer. And now, of course, it's a 23-cent per gallon gas tax.
Okay, now I have a couple of comments. First of all, you need to understand that in order to control us, the government wants us all dependent on the government. What government does is take away everything from the people and then give it back as long as you do what you're told to do. Whether it's an assistance check, food stamps, dependency is slavery. And that's why I did that article the other day about the Declaration of Independence being perfectly relevant for today.
That was fantastic. That was one of the best things I've ever heard on.
Well, thank you very much. And but the other situation here is supposedly, I mean, there are already taxes on tires, on gas and oil that we're supposed to be paying for the upkeep of our roads. Obviously, the government hasn't spent that money keeping our roads repaired. So what is raising a new tax supposedly to fix the roads, it's not necessary if they've been doing their job. And second, we have got absolutely no guarantee that any money that they take from us under any pretext, whether it's, repairing the roads or global warming or whatever, is not immediately going to go to feeding the bankers and feeding the war machine.
Exactly. And the last thing that I had said in the next election was I suggested that the state of New Jersey found its own bank so that it doesn't need to borrow money from private banks, but it can create its own money just as the private banks do.
Well, North Dakota has a state bank, and they're actually one. Yeah, they're one of the best banks that are out there. And or the best state economies out there, and it's a model everybody ought to be following. Now, the North Dakota Bank still has to use the U.S. Federal Reserve note, but they are in existence to manage the economy of Nebraska as a public utility, not as a privatized for-profit operation. And it's an absolutely ideal model. The Bank of Canada was supposed to be set up that way. Technically, it's owned by the Canadian people. And under the original charter, they were supposed to provide interest-free loans for infrastructure development, but unfortunately the Canadian government, back in the 1970s, stopped availing themselves of interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada and started getting those loans at interest from private bankers. And it was the subject of this lawsuit, the Comer lawsuit, which was hushed up by the Canadian media. It's all about feeding the money junkies.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay?
You're right, Mike. Thanks a lot. Keep up the good work. And that was, again, I'll say that again, that was one of the best things I've heard.
The one about the Declaration. I should reprise that. Actually, the guy who did the video for All Wars Are Bankers' Wars is going to be making a video with that article and a couple of others for a long project that he's working on. So that's not going to go away anytime soon.
That's great.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you very much. Now then. Another major U.S. retailer files for bankruptcy. 126 stores are likely to close. It's an outfit out of Texas called Hastings. You probably haven't heard them. They're a retailer that unfortunately is clinging to a failed business model. CDs, DVDs, books, movies, games, and rentals. Like Sam Goody, Harmony House, Musicland, and Blockbuster, all of which have gone out of business in this era of direct digital download. But still, it's another employer, another business going out. The second largest owner of shopping malls in the United States, General Growth Properties, just missed a $144 million loan payment. They may be going into bankruptcy and receivership as well. Now, there's a real simple concept here that all the money junkies seem oblivious to. If you take away the high-paying jobs of ordinary people, the people don't have the money to go buy things at those shopping malls. It's that simple. And nobody seems to understand that. Prior to the mortgage-backed security fraud of 2008, consumer spending represented 60% of the American economy. It's not something you can just throw aside and say, well, we don't need to worry about that anymore. We're in a wartime economy now. From the banker's point of view, they want you buying. They just want you to buy on your credit card and run up your debt even more. But right now, the average American household is carrying $90,000 in debt. Try paying that off at $15 an hour. Plus, that does not include your share of the government's debt, which is now closing in on $60,000 per individual American. Every single living American, $60,000 for the U.S. government. Now, the U.S. government is filled with people who get lots of money from the bankers for their election campaigns. And that's why all they ever do is pay the interest. They don't pay down the principal. They never have. The reality is that if back during the 60s, all of the government's loans were put down to zero interest rate, like they're trying to do now for Wall Street, we would have paid off the entire national debt by now. But the bankers don't want it paid off. That debt is their slave chain on you. And their lackeys in Congress are there to make sure you go on wearing those slave chains made of debt and keep them polished up nice and clean. Make sure your credit rating is good. They're not going to let you go. They love things just the way they are. Now then, over in France, rather interesting development, not getting a lot of coverage. In fact, I had to translate this from a French article. There was a tribute being held to police officers who were recently killed. And the Prime Minister and President, Hollande and Valls, showed up for this memorial and this tribute. And one of the police officers pointedly, in full view of the news cameras, absolutely refused to shake hands with either one of them. That's a bad sign, because it tells us the police are turning against Hollande, Valls, and austerity at a time when much of the nation is rioting and protesting over that very issue. So let's talk a little bit about immigration. CIA Director Brennan is out there saying Donald Trump is right. ISIS is exploiting this open refugee system to infiltrate the United States of America. They're just coming across the border and vanishing into our society. Clearly, our government wants these people out there committing acts of terror. Remember, we've had that whistleblower from inside the Department of Homeland Security saying that he was ordered by higher-ups to delete the records of refugees inside the United States with links to terrorist organizations. They need them. Apparently, over in Texas, tuberculosis cases have doubled ever since the influx of refugees coming on in. And the Texas city where the police shot this Walmart hostage taker, Somalian refugee, the city is bursting with refugees. It's an absolute disaster. We're starting to see the same chaos here in the United States that they're seeing all across Europe. So what is the government going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. A federal judge has blocked Texas efforts to keep refugees out of their state. That's astounding. The federal government is clearly not on the side of the American people on any of these issues. Over in Germany, they just had a survey, and they found out half of the Turkish Germans are convinced that Islamic law must be held above state law. In other words, they're going to follow Sharia law ahead of German law, even if it conflicts. That's very destabilizing. And when I put this article up at WhatReallyHappened.com, I paired it with this photo of Teddy Roosevelt and his comment about, you are welcome to come here, but understand this is the United States of America. We have one country, America. We have one language, English. And if you're going to come here, you will be an American and nothing else. And we need that attitude. And there was this article yesterday we were talking about. This war is really coming down to the globalists versus the nationalists. And the globalists are in serious, serious trouble. And the open question is, how bloody are they willing to let this get before they admit defeat? Now, turning to Great Britain and the Brexit, apparently the German EU chief has just aroused a tremendous amount of anger, calling British support for Brexit idiotic and demanding that Britain accept what a great deal being in the EU is. Well, of course, being in the EU has turned out to be a very bad deal for pretty much everybody in it, except for those unelected members of the European Commission up in Brussels. They're having a real good time. Champagne served to their desks and, luxury resorts and all the rest of it. They're having a real good time. They love things just the way they are. Labour MPs are urging Britons to vote for the Brexit next week. And they're saying this is going to help get rid of Cameron and Osborne, and that's a major selling point. Germany is so desperate to fight the Brexit, they're saying that if Britain leaves the European Union, Germany will boycott, will blockade no more German sausages to Great Britain. Which sounds silly until you've had German sausages, because they really do know how to make them really well over there. But still, it indicates the degree of panic these people are dealing with. Now, here is a really interesting comment. A Swiss lawmaker from the Christian Democratic People's Party, quoted in Sputnik, was out there saying that Brexit would be a catastrophe for the Swiss economy. So bear with me a moment. What we have here, Switzerland, which just withdrew its application to join the EU, is demanding Britain stay in the EU to protect the Swiss economy. Good for us, bad for you, or bad for us, good for you. Now, following the assassination of Joe Cox, both sides in the Brexit campaign suspended their campaign now for 48 hours. The Remain people are trying to call for the referendum to be canceled and go back to status quo ante. I don't think that's really going to work. People are very, very angry. Now, when Cox was first shot, the media quoted a bystander who has a business right there where it happened as saying he tackled the shooter and the shooter was screaming Britain first. This is the guy the media was saying reported this. He's now gone public. He's even posted signs on the front of his business saying, no, I did not tackle the shooter. No, I did not say that he said Britain first. It's made up. And as a matter of fact, the stories we're now getting from the area are that the accused shooter was having an argument with another individual entirely, and Joe Cox stepped in to try and calm things down and got shot entirely by accident. And here's the payoff. They've had another poll since Joe Cox was killed. Support for Brexit has gone up. So the attempt to exploit this as sympathy and support for Remain has absolutely cratered. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And so we're talking about the Brexit. The polls are swinging rapidly towards leave. Apparently, before and after on the Joe Cox murder, Remain lost 8 percentage points, falling from 40% to 32%. Because people understand it was being exploited to try and trick them into sympathy and support to remain the slaves of the European Central Bank, and they're not buying it. Zbigniew Brzezinski once described the great awakening of the masses of people. From his point of view, that's a bad thing. They don't want you realizing the true nature of the world, because then it makes it much harder for them to have their lives of wealth and privilege at your expense. Let's see. More and more of these things here. NBC News is saying polls are swinging toward Brexit. The Scottish Farmers poll shows agricultural support for Brexit. Over at the Daily Mail, they're now reporting 72% are in favor of the Brexit. That's going to be a hard margin to overcome with vote fraud. And there's a new wrinkle added to the debate. This is coming out of VernonColeman.com. Basically pointing out that the way Britain was dragged into the EU is actually a violation of British law, which doesn't stop governments from doing that. We have the same situation here in Hawaii. Bill Clinton actually apologized for the illegal annexation of Hawaii. Didn't give it back, of course. He said, we feel really bad about this, but we're going to keep it anyway. So, here in the United States of America, Congress is starting to move on impeaching the head of the Internal Revenue Service over lying under oath during investigation into Obama's targeting of enemies with the IRS, which, by the way, was also an article of impeachment against Richard Nixon. They didn't have to go forward because he resigned to avoid that trial. And he did that because the last thing anybody wanted on the floor of the Senate was somebody asking why they broke into the Watergate Hotel when Richard Nixon's re-election was a foregone conclusion. Because the reason for the break-in would have unwound all the stuff going back to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and nobody wanted that one out there. Right now, there are more workers at online media sites than on paper newspapers. We are the new mainstream. Print is pretty much dead. And by the way, I do want to take issue with my fellows out here in the independent media. Please don't call the major TV news networks and newspapers the mainstream media anymore. We're the new mainstream. Those are the corporate media. We're the independent media. But we've got the lion's share of the audience. We're the mainstream now. We're the high ground in the war for the minds of America and the world. We need to start acting like that. Now, former CNN journalist Amber Lyon has gone public saying that governments do pay CNN to fake news stories and control the content. We knew that. They're all correspondents and prostitutes. We've got to take a break for station identification. Back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us on our third hour Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. So what is the first thing that you want to talk about?
Well, dear, it appears that the EU has stepped in it again by extending Russian sanctions over Crimea for one more year for what it called Moscow's illegal annexation of Crimea. Now, folks, that is not what happened. When Yanukovych got thrown under the proverbial bus and Poroshenko was installed as Ukraine's president, the Crimean people and government realized they had no representation whatsoever. They, in a free and fair referendum, asked the people of Crimea if they wanted to affiliate with the Russian Federation. And in this free and fair referendum, the Crimean people said, yeah, looks reasonable to us.
Actually, there were 2 referendums.
Yes.
The first one was independence from Kiev. And by the way, that is a right the people of Crimea are allowed to have under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Peaceful self-representation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this idea of extending the sanctions against Russia, this is causing tremendous harm to the European Union economies at a time when they cannot afford it. And it is a reminder that the people who run the European Union, those commissioners, are not elected by the people. The EU Parliament will talk about things, but they don't actually have the power to create or repeal laws. Everything is being dictated from these unelected, self-appointed tyrants over the European Union. And so they can sit up there, with the champagne being delivered to their desks and all the rest of it and say, we're going to sanction Russia and we don't care if it harms the people of Europe because we don't have elections here. We don't have to worry.
Yeah, and I think that this is very much going to potentially contribute because people in Europe are getting steamed about the people they can and can't do business with. I think we are looking at a Brexit, Grexit, and Frexit in the not-too-distant future.
I would certainly hope to see that. And at this point, they're getting desperate in the Remain camp. We could actually see the British people overwhelmingly vote for Brexit, and Parliament simply sit up there and say, well, we heard your concerns, but that could trigger an actual revolution. And if Great Britain breaks away from the European Union, there's another concern. We're seeing this rush to form a unified European Union army under the command of Brussels, not the individual governments of the member nations.
Right.
We could literally see the EU invade Britain for exactly the same reason Lincoln invaded the Confederacy, bring them back into the tax base.
Yep, that's not beyond the realm of possibility. I would also like to talk to something about Clinton and California, where Sanders got really, really messed up.
Cheated.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one little tiny factoid that is sort of circulating now and making and making its way heard out of Zero Hedge. There was an article last week that the Saudi Arabia Crown Prince went on record only to subsequently retract it, saying that he was paying for 20% of Hillary's campaign costs. And that's a problem.
It's illegal.
It's illegal, yeah. And...
Well, I mean, it's illegal. The Clintons have done it before, though.
Yeah.
Again, part of that whole Chinagate scandal.
Mm-hmm.
We know the Clintons, during Bill Clinton's re-election campaign, were soliciting donations from people in Cuba. We remember that wonderful photo of then First Lady Hillary Clinton posed before the White House Christmas tree with a known cocaine smuggler.
Yep.
Who got to pose with the First Lady because he donated $25,000 to the Clinton campaign.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a cocaine smuggler. I'm not a dangerous individual. I've never been to the White House. That's because I've never donated $25,000 to any of the candidates. I mean, I keep sending these wonderful Christmas cards we create ourselves to the White House every year. We've never gotten one back.
No, that's bad form.
That's bad. Well, we did get a very nice thank you note because back when Obama was running against Romney, we had those two puppets.
Yes.
We sent those to the coordinator of the Obama Presidential Library, and we actually did get a nice thank you note from them. So I do want to acknowledge when they obey the proper forms.
And so I have to wonder, if Hillary does steal/win this election, how is that going to affect foreign policy with all the money the Crown Prince from Saudi Arabia has spent? And I would imagine, if she's well and truly bought, to look for more arms sales to Saudi Arabia, whose government has never found a war crime they didn't want to embrace, particularly in its war against Yemen's Houthis, such as the killing of civilians, the use of cluster bombs against civilians, shelling of hospitals and schools, and a concerted collective look the other way as Saudi Arabia exports its violent Wahhabi culture of jihad into other Middle Eastern countries.
Well, you need to understand that Hillary is the darling of the neocons. She's fully on board with the new repackaged Project for the New American Century, which is basically the U.S. conquer the world. And one really good way to do that is to get the nations that you want to control to go to war against each other and wear each other out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Israel is not going to be happy about Saudi influence over the U.S. government.
Oh, no,
they've been trying to block it all along and demonize Saudi Arabia. And, Saudi Arabia did 9/11 and the rest of it.
Yep.
But there is absolutely no question that Hillary in the White House will lead to an era of incredible international confusion, chaos, and war. She's fully on board with pursuing this war agenda for the next 100 years of endless, perpetual war on the rest of the world until they buy our GMO and our vaccines and use our paper dollar.
Yeah,
Right?
and it's very interesting to me and painfully ironic because she is supposed to be the women's candidate. All of the governments of the Middle East that have contributed to her foundation have one thing in common.
They don't treat women very, very well.
Oh, it goes beyond that.
Yeah, well, maybe it's an extortion racket Hillary's been running. Donate to me and I won't mention your human rights violations. If you don't donate to me, I will make the case that we have to come in and bomb you.
Well, it's worse than that because all of the countries in the Middle East who have sent money to the Clinton Foundation allow the practice of female genital mutilation, folks. Pro-women? I don't think so. If she doesn't have a conscience that says, I can't take money from a government that does that. But I guess she's had hers surgically removed.
I don't think she was even born with one. And for her to call herself a pro-woman candidate, when you look at the way that she treated all of these women who came forward about Bill Clinton's sexual assaults.
That's rich.
When you look at the way Hillary Clinton literally destroyed this young girl, this young rape victim, to get a man that she knew had done the crime off. And then she laughed about it afterwards. She's not pro-woman. She's pro-Hillary. That's it. Hillary Clinton has only one priority. That's Hillary Clinton. She's not pro-woman. She's not pro-business. She's not pro-black. She's not pro-Hispanic. She is pro-Hillary. End of story.
Right, right. I'd like to go to the great divide between the CIA chief and Obama regarding the ISIS threat. Because what we were getting from President Obama was completely different than what we were getting from Brennan this last week.
Yes.
In the Senate hearings. And But it's interesting because given Obama's penchant for discarding members of his team who have a different narrative on what's going on, I'm really surprised Brennan still has his job, Mike.
Well, Brennan was brought in, as a replacement for his predecessor, and it may be that Brennan has got something on Hillary, and you need to understand at this point, Obama is welded to Hillary. When she goes down, Obama goes down.
Yep.
And yes, he's coming to his end of term, but he's thinking about his legacy. And if Hillary goes down as having actually been running a spy operation out of the State Department, then Obama's place in the history book is going to be roughly in the same chapter as that of Richard Nixon.
Yeah, that's not good. And we seem to have a couple of agendas here. One is that the jihadist attacks in the Middle East are supposed to keep Americans fearful and hopeful that the United States government can prevent such attacks here, which didn't happen in Orlando deliberately.
Well, again, we have the documents that have come out from the email investigations showing that the U.S. government and the U.S. State Department under Hillary Clinton were covertly sending arms and supplies to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And Fast and Furious was sending these military weapons to Mexican drug cartels. At the same time, the government is saying, oh, no, you don't need to have guns to defend your homes. We'll take care of you, honest. I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. And I think we have to remember in all of this brouhaha that the original contract with America is the Constitution and Bill of Rights.
I've heard that somewhere.
Yeah, I think I've heard you say that. I would like to bop over to the economy for a moment.
Please do.
The U.S. current account trade deficit is at its highest level at 7 years.
That means the imbalance is away from the U.S. and it's working against it.
Yeah. And apparently the current account trade deficit jumped 9.9% in the first quarter to $124.7 billion, with a B, the Commerce Department reported yesterday. It is the biggest gap since a deficit of $152.5 billion in the fourth quarter of 2008 at the height of the financial crisis. And I have to wonder, is this what the Obama administration means when they boast of having fixed the economy for the last almost 8 years? I mean, forgive me, but those numbers look pretty darn wretched to me.
Well, they fixed the economy in the context of they're rigging the markets to make them look good for the election year, but that's about all that they can do.
Yep.
And it all goes back to a very simple reality. The private central bank model is inherently unstable because it creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt swells and crashes the system. It is impossible for an economy based on a private central bank to be perpetual. It has a built-in self-destructive device, and that's really what's going on here. And again, the politicians that are just concerned about re-election and their perks and making things look good. We were talking earlier about all these warning signs that the U.S. economy is in serious trouble, and the corporate media will not cover it because their job is to make the incumbents look like they're doing a swell job, at least until the November elections, and then after that it's all going to fall apart.
Sort of like touching up the x-rays when a patient has cancer.
Yeah, and they can't afford the treatments.
The treatments, yeah. I'd like to also talk about images of chained diapers detainees worried Bush. He was worried about the image of shackled detainees wearing adult diapers.
Well, that's a bad PR image, but I have to be very honest. I think this is a limited hangout, and I think there's a lot worse in there, especially because of Binyam Mohammed, who was one of the U.S. torture victims.
I know what happened to this guy.
He went public, and a lot worse things were done to him than waterboarding, and his body still has the scars.
I hear you. And you know, it's interesting with Bush. He was more worried about the damage rather than forbidding the acts of torture, which were recorded by these images. And it's a very real insight into the utter absence of any decency or morality Bush consistently demonstrated as president. I mean, torturing is okay, but having actual images of the torture recorded was the big, fat, hairy, tacky no-no?
From a politician's point of view, that's exactly right.
Oh, man.
And by the way, the Congress, this new National Defense Authorization Bill that just went through, prohibits the release of any more of the prisoners from Guantanamo, because those guys who are still down there, and even the kangaroo court says 2/3 of them have done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But they're not going to be released because their bodies bear the marks of what the U.S. government did to them.
Yep.
And the U.S. just does not want that on international news.
No. And President Obama said that these images cause significant damage to America's standing in the world. And darn it, Mike, they should have. No leader of the alleged free world should ever, ever torture. Period. End of discussion.
Yeah, and again, what you said before, he's out there saying these pictures are destroying the standing of the United States in the world. No, it's the act of torture that did that.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows it happened.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there were no compelling moral reasons for Bush to have gone to war against Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, Iraq was all about the oil, Afghanistan about the pipeline routes and opium from which to make cheap, potent heroin. And you're talking basically about wars for corporate profit, not to protect the Americans or American way of life. And it really bothers me tremendously that the young men and women who died, fought, and got maimed for life were simply collateral damage to Bush and his cronies. That was all.
Well, as Kissinger said, military people are just dumb, stupid pawns to be used in foreign policy. And that really is the prevailing attitude. And they think that's a good attitude for them to have. They're sociopathic.
Yeah.
And it's a tragedy of the human condition that sociopaths are so easily able to move into positions of power and control.
And speaking about Afghanistan, we have a new milestone there. The Taliban now holds more of Afghanistan now than at any other time since 2001.
Which means we've lost that war. Well, all the U.S. is really concerned about is guarding the pipeline and the opium poppies, and they could care less about the rest of Afghanistan. And we've got the pictures of coalition troops and people with American insignia guarding, protecting, harvesting, and shipping the raw opium out of there.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like they did in Vietnam.
This is an unmitigated disaster of epic proportions, and there is absolutely no military metric by which the U.S. and NATO occupation could ever be characterized as a success. And for all the blood and money spent to only achieve absolute failure in Afghanistan, it's pretty damn near incomprehensible. Pardon my French.
Watch your language on this radio.
Yes,
don't you curse on this here radio.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, again, the dichotomy is sorting out what the real agenda of the war is versus what we're told. There was never a way to be able to declare victory in Iraq because all of the reasons we were told for going into Iraq they didn't exist.
Yeah.
We were told Saddam had nuclear weapons, Saddam was aiding al-Qaeda, Saddam was connected with 9/11. All three turned out to be lies.
Right.
By the information given to the American people, there is no way the government can say we are victorious in Iraq. They couldn't accomplish any of the publicly stated goals. The private goals were, of course, to force Iraq's oil back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. And then in that they succeeded. So from their point of view, that was a victory. They've got the gas pipeline and opium in Afghanistan. From their point of view, that's a victory. And we need to look past all of this garbage we're being fed to sell us these wars and say what's really going on here. Who's really benefiting from the killing and crippling of all of our young people and the absolute gutting of what's left of our economy? Who's really benefiting? And if they want to benefit from these wars, why aren't they paying for them and fighting them?
Absolutely. And sort of on that note, this happened yesterday. Worried about stigmatizing cluster bombs, the House has just approved more sales of them to Saudi Arabia. And the House narrowly defeated a measure that would have banned the transfer of cluster bombs to Saudi Arabia. And but the closeness of the vote may indicate that there's a little bit of blowback coming from Congress. I hope there's going to be more than blowback.
Now, cluster bombs are banned under international law. I don't think the U.S. or Saudi Arabia signed on to that treaty.
No,
but
they
pretty
didn't.
much the rest of the world understands these weapons are all about killing civilians.
Yeah, and this proxy war against the Houthis, abetted and enabled by the U.S. government in Yemen, has been an absolute, I can say it, flustercluck there. I was safe.
Yes, you
I
were.
wrote it out, and I was very careful.
Okay.
And the problem with the morality of the Saudi government and military is they've never met a war crime they didn't embrace, like killing civilians, women, children, medically fragile, elderly, and bombing hospitals and schools.
Well, see, there's a reality. Only the losing side gets prosecuted for war crimes.
Yeah. And I put some images to see what these bombs look like, and they are terrifyingly close to the emergency food packages that some people are used to getting dropped. And kids who can't read English aren't going to know the difference, and they will get torn limb from limb.
Well, Cynthia McKinney had made that point during the war in Afghanistan, that the cluster munitions were painted in the same color and had the same typeface as the emergency food packages.
Right.
And kids were picking them up, and they were getting their hands blown off.
Yeah, and it's estimated that 98% of the victims of cluster bombs are civilians, and 40% are children. And should these cluster bomb munitions be stigmatized for the deaths and injuries they cause? Heck, yes.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And where did you want to go next?
Well, apparently South Korea is holding sea drills to prepare for Pyongyang's provocations. South Korea is conducting maritime exercises off their west coast to prepare for possible North Korean provocations, the country's Navy said in a Thursday statement. We are keeping full combat readiness to swiftly respond to the enemy's possible provocations in waters off the west coast, as quoted by South Korean Yonhap news agency. They started on Thursday. They involve about 20 warships. That's a lot of heavy metal.
And we need to remember, it wasn't all that long ago that there was the sinking of the South Korean ship, the Cheosan, which was blamed on North Korea. And they were saying it's a North Korean torpedo, it's a North Korean torpedo. And they brought up remains of the torpedo, and they had a blueprint of the North Korean torpedo design. And they didn't match. It was obviously not the same kind of weapon, and it turned out the torpedo that had been used to sink the Cheosan is a German export model, which a lot of countries have. But, again, governments will sacrifice ships and people to try and get a war going. Israel did it to the USS Liberty. Franklin Roosevelt did it to 3 ships down here in Pearl Harbor, and they tried to do it with the Cheosan. They sent the Lusitania without escorts into an area they knew was crawling with German U-boats. That's how they start the wars, and we need to be on guard that they're going to do it again.
Yeah, some kind of false flag. I'd like to talk, did you speak earlier about the U.S. diplomats who have rebuked Obama on Syria?
We touched on it briefly.
Okay.
And we were talking about basically how they're dropping this pretext that the last year in Syria has been about going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
And they're just dropping and say, we're going to go after Assad. We have that State Department memo coming on out which says we're going to regime change Syria because that will be good for Israel and Russia will dare not interfere.
That's bad analysis.
Bad analysis, right?
Bad analysis.
Bad analysis.
And apparently these people are advocating for strikes against al-Assad and his army to punish them for breaking the truce. But Mike, who in reality has actually been doing more of the truce breaking?
Well, it's been the hired terrorists and mercenaries.
The armed jihadists and aided and abetted by the Turkish government, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, we know that. I mean, they were being aided by the Turkish government, but at this point, the Syrian army has pretty much cut off those routes. So those assets, if you will, are cut off from escape, and they're cut off from their supply lines, and it's only a matter of time before, the end is there. The U.S. is just trying to get in there and salvage the situation, because if they fail in Syria, then this whole plan to dollarifize the Middle East is in serious, serious trouble.
Right.
They need Syria before they can move on Iran, and at this point, they're in serious trouble. Russia has come on in at the invitation of the Syrian government,
right?
Which the U.S. isn't. The U.S. and all their coalition for German troops on the ground in Syria without Syria's permission, French troops on the... This is an invasion. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah,
the U.S. and their allies are trying to invade Syria and change the government. That's what's going on here.
Yeah. And we risk war with Russia over this very intensely.
Yes.
And you mentioned to me off air that Russia has said, I don't think this is a good idea, United States, for you to do.
Yeah, Russia has already warned the U.S. against trying a strike against Assad himself.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how intently the U.S. is going to listen because the government finds itself in such a financial bind right now.
That's the real danger here because from the point of view of Wall Street and Washington, D.C., they can't change course. They can't back off. They can't turn around and say, all right, this was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Right now their attitude is we have to win this no matter what, or the U.S. economy is going to implode and we're all actually going to be poor and out of work, and it doesn't matter how many millions of other people's lives we're going to have to sacrifice. We must move forward. Victory or death. Our victory, somebody else's death.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to wonder with these 51 diplomats, how many of them actually have young people and their families in the military?
I'm going to take a wild guess and say none. And aren't diplomats supposed to be diplomatic?
That was the idea.
That was the idea.
That was the concept.
We got to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Mike in Maryland. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'm on speakerphone. Is the sound coming through okay?
Yeah, I can understand you.
Okay, great. Hey, listen, I listen to a wide variety of talk show hosts on the internet and on the AM, FM radio, as well as get news sources from various places. But I was driving home from work today, and I heard the story. I listen to NPR, fairly often. Of course, because that's a different form of propaganda.
Yes.
But I heard this, and I like some of their cultural things on there. But at any rate, I heard this article on NPR on the local station out of D.C. that 51 or 51.3 high-ranking State Department officials sent a letter to Obama advocating that he bomb Assad. I mean, how many countries will those psychopaths in Washington, D.C. have? How many countries will those psychopaths have us bomb? It's just,
all of them.
It's just never ending.
All of them. Go back to that Project for the New American Century. It's calling for global domination of the world by the United States of America, and Hillary Clinton is fully on board. The answer is nations will submit to the U.S. or they will be bombed.
I mean, it's just never ending, and I keep hoping that somehow we're going to have a mutiny in the ranks of our military or some strong, protest against bombing innocent people. And what's so ridiculous is the State Department official had these crying crocodile tears over the plight of starving people in Syria and the refugee crisis and how evil Assad is, and it's just bold-faced, crude propaganda from NPR.
Of course it is. The only reason these people in all these countries are hungry and homeless, and the only reason there is a refugee crisis, are all these U.S. invasions and interventions and drone strikes into all these countries. If the U.S. had been minding its own business and following Trump's model of peace through commerce, there wouldn't be a refugee crisis. These people wouldn't be hungry. They wouldn't be living in rubble. This is all the fault of U.S. foreign policy. And
you're absolutely right. In the late 60s, when I was in high school, I'm dating myself here, I protested against the war in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in my early 60s, and I'm still protesting the wars that we're fighting, as well as being a 9/11 truther. And it's just, it's like, I know, it's like never ending. I just can't believe it.
Well, it's never ending because it's all driven by the money junkies at the private central banks. They love wars. Wars are their richest harvest of debt. And again, when you have a private central bank in control of a nation, there's this horrible three-step path to war. You cannot have a private central bank and avoid war. It's impossible. The way a private central bank works is the first moment that pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private central bank than actually exists. And the way the Ponzi scheme keeps working is more and more people are encouraged to borrow to allow the creation of more money out of thin air, I might add, until finally the people reach a stage where they won't borrow anymore because they're struggling with the payments. And it's at that point the Keynesian economists step on in and say, well, government's got to borrow on behalf of the people and without their permission to keep that little debt pyramid growing. Then you reach a point where the people won't borrow anymore, the government can't borrow anymore, and that's when they launch a war to grab somebody else's wealth to keep their private central bankers happy. And that's the stage where we are right now.
Yep, it's very sad. Hey, you got a great show, and let me say hello to your wife. I hope your lovely wife there, and you'll have a good weekend. Thank you.
You too, and thank you for the call.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Now, your next story is about the Environmental Protection Agency, which doesn't really protect the environment all that much.
Or people. It appears that the feds are quietly considering reviving EPA's human testing program. The National Academy of Sciences, NAS, has met 5 times behind closed doors this past year to discuss the possibility of reviving the Environmental Protection Agency experiments exposing humans to harmful air and pollutants. NAS is examining the findings of a 2014 EPA Inspector General reporting, which found that the agency had exposed human test subjects to ostensibly deadly air pollutants without disclosing the risk of death or the total amount of pollutants subjects would have to inhale. But the lack of public participation in the study has Steve Malloy worried. EPA could be trying to revive its potentially illegal testing regime, which has exposed children, asthmatics, and people with heart disease to concentrated doses of pollutants. Well, you know what I would tell them? I would very strongly and politely suggest to the NAS that they experiment only upon themselves and their kids if they're going to be risking life and limb and not on us. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, it is a fact under United States law. Biological warfare testing can be carried out on the civilian population without their knowledge and without their permission. There have been some horrible accidents. There was one they did in San Francisco, I think it was back in the 60s. People actually died from this. And that should remind you how much or how little government actually respects you as a human being. Mm-hmm. They see you as their property, as workers, as human capital, as livestock. And we keep seeing that time and time again, the way they treat ordinary people, the way they treat the workers, the way they treat the military. They're sort of fallen into that Andrew Carnegie mindset, where the ultra-rich are a completely different species of humans, and the others just aren't deserving of anything. And in a lot of ways, it's like the Eloy and the Morlock from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. It's really starting to happen.
Absolutely.
Next.
Absolutely. Apparently, in Pennsylvania, the Catholic Church is accused of using mafia-like tactics to fight a sex abuse bill. And apparently what they've been doing has been trying to put pressure on individual Catholic lawmakers who support state legislation that would give victims of sexual abuse more time to sue their abusers. The lobbying campaign against the legislation is being led by Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput, a staunch conservative who recently created a stir after inadvertently sending an email to a state representative, Jamie Santora, in which he accused the lawmaker, get this, of betraying the church and said Santora would suffer consequences for his support of the legislation. It also got sent to a senior member in Chaput's office, and this has really made Catholic members of the legislature just absolutely furious, who have voted their conscience on this bill. And
you know, it's interesting because earlier in the show I commented on this survey where in Germany they've done a survey of refugees from Turkey, and 60% of them said that their allegiance was to Islamic law even over German state law.
Oops.
And we're seeing the Catholics actually get into that same mindset.
Yeah.
That what is in their Bible and their religion is superior and above the laws of mere mortal men.
Yeah. Apparently one Catholic state representative, Martina White, went on a local radio program to describe how she had been crushed when she was uninvited to several planned events at local Catholic parishes because of her support for the bill. You know, this is really insane.
The witch burnings will continue this week.
Remember that movie that we saw about abuse. Remember?
Spotlight.
Spotlight, yes.
Okay.
If you have not seen that, please do. It is a very interesting exploration of the use of power by the church and what it was able to do and accomplish.
Now, this is based on a true story that happened in Baltimore, and it sort of marks the transition where prior to the Spotlight series, the insiders all knew this sexual molestation of children by the Catholic clergy was going on, but we can't challenge the church that's going against God, and Jesus won't like us if we do that. And it was an epidemic problem, and Spotlight was a specific team of reporters in a column in the Baltimore newspaper. I forget the name of the newspaper itself. And they looked into this thing, and they found all this evidence and discovered it was a horrendous problem that was going on. And they wanted to publish, and all this pressure came on in. No, you can't embarrass the church no matter what they do. And it's almost becoming a hallmark of our time. It was like what somebody else was saying about the diaper pictures. Okay,
Yeah.
It's the public image harm
And
that
perception.
we're worried about. It's the perception that we're worried about. We're not concerned about the behavior. The behavior is going to be the behavior. We're going to do what we want to do. We just don't want the public to know about it. Well, I'm a great believer in public visibility and accountability. If you're doing something wrong, whether it's diddling an altar boy or waterboarding a completely innocent Iraqi to find weapons of mass destruction that actually don't exist, you should be held up to public scorn and ridicule for it. And I don't think there is anybody that's above reproach when they're behaving badly. And that does include Hillary Clinton herself.
Yeah. It's a sick culture that's got to be remedied.
Yes, it is a very sick culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost time for another asteroid, I think.
I'd also like to go over to Syria and Iraq again. Apparently there was an unreported mass killing in the past 6 months in Syria and Iraq. And apparently there has been the growth of various, they're called allied gang members, but they're U.S.-enabled fighters, who slaughtered between 1,110 to 1,558 innocent men, women, and children. And this happened from December 1st, 2015 through May 31st, 2016. And the airstrikes were over 4,000, including 3,000 over Iraq and 1,000 over Syria. Apparently, aiding and abetting in the slaughter and now being sought by law enforcement are France, the UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Australia, Denmark, and Canada. And Canada has expressed remorse, but none of the other perpetrators have done this. So these airstrikes that were organized by the U.S. have killed thousands and thousands of innocent people, Mike, in the last 6 months.
And all the time this was going on, you were being told that the U.S. was attacking ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Oh, yeah.
And they weren't. They never really hit them. They hit some empty buildings here. We had that story that came out from Russia today, I think it was Wednesday, where they had video of a fortified ISIS position right next to the border with Turkey in Syria, flying the ISIS flag, being ignored by Turkey, being ignored by coalition air assets flying overhead. U.S. warplanes, French warplanes were flying over this identifiable ISIS position. They did not attack it.
Right.
Because the real goal is still getting Assad, as this letter with the 51 diplomats is saying. They're dropping the pretext that this is about fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda because they know, Americans just found out, ISIS and Al-Qaeda work for the United States of America. They were armed and supplied and trained by them. We have all these official documents that have leaked out about it. So they're going to say, well, yeah, you're right. We're really out there getting rid of Assad because we want to take over another country and put in a puppet ruler, and Israel wants that too. So, of course, we're going to go ahead and do that and risk a war with Russia that could escalate out of control and lead to a nuclear conflict.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, I'm beginning to think the tap water in Washington, D.C. may be as polluted and toxic as the stuff in Flint, Michigan.
You could be right.
These people aren't making any sense. I mean, between that and prescription antidepressants, the quality of thinking coming out of Washington, D.C. is actually rather poor.
Yes, and there seems to be a pathological inability of anyone in D.C. to be able to think something through to its logical conclusion.
Well, again, going back to history, that was something that helped bring down the Third Reich more rapidly, because toward the end of it all, the German High Command stopped telling Adolf Hitler what was really going on and started telling Hitler what they thought Hitler wanted to know. And so decisions were being made on the basis of wishful thinking.
Yep.
And again, that recently released State Department memo in which they came on out and said, Russia will not dare interfere, shows us the same kind of wishful thinking is dominating the planning process in the State Department. Because, Russia did interfere.
Yeah. To say that in any kind of an alleged analysis is hubris writ large.
Absolutely.
And we know what happens with hubris from our background with the Greek plays and Greek tragedies. Hubris always brings someone down.
Whom
way
the
down.
gods would destroy, they first make proud.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to bop on over to the fact that the House in D.C. has rejected efforts to ban illegal immigrants from military service. And I'm kind of wrapping my head around this.
I mean, does anybody really think a refugee or an illegal immigrant is going to be an effective military personnel for this country? They haven't grown up here. They don't have an emotional connection. They're not going to be effective forces unless they're here to be used against the American people. And all the government has to say is, well, if you go out and kill all those American gun owners, you can move into their homes for you. And I'm joking, but the reality is this is basically admitting between this and the new law where they're going to draft women is telling us that our military, despite all the money poured into it, is rapidly running out of resources.
Yeah.
And if they're talking about bringing illegal immigrants and refugees into the military, first of all, I don't expect any of them are going to enlist anyway.
Yeah.
And as illegal immigrants, they're actually immune from the draft anyway. But even if they're brought on in and given all the weapons and everything, they're going to cower in their foxholes. They're not going to go on out there and take that extra step to win the war. Remember what Sun Tzu said about the necessities for winning a war. Your army must believe in the moral rightness of what they're doing, or they're not going to be willing to fight and die to win the battle. And that's going to be the case with all of these illegal immigrants and refugees.
You know, and the other thing is, how many of them speak a standard English, which will enable them to be instructed in English without having to revert to Spanish and then moving them into English. I mean, isn't that going to be an expensive proposition, Mike?
Well, probably what they're going to do is set up units of all a certain language with commanders who are bilingual.
Okay.
And because they did a lot of that in World War II with all the different units from the Allies coming on in. And it was a headache for the Battle of Britain, where they had all these foreign fighter pilots, who were supposedly bilingual, but in the stress of battle would always revert to their native language.
Yeah, and no one could understand
what they were saying.
Nobody could
understand what they were saying.
Yeah, I just have to wonder why President Obama is so eager on this recruitment pull. It just doesn't make sense, unless it is to neutralize American citizens in some way.
Well, again, we're heading into a situation like Europe with riots and everything. Maybe that's part of the plan to transition America into a dictatorship. Declare a national emergency, martial law.
Yep.
We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Might help if I turned up the volume here.
Okay.
Welcome back to the last segment of our program on this Kaahumanu Friday. And Claire, you had one more story you wanted to share with us.
Yes, I did. Apparently, the DEA is demanding warrantless access to millions of health records, allegedly to combat prescription drug abuse. And it goes on to say that it might have been launched with the best of intentions during the Reagan administration, but the so-called alleged war on drugs has been used more times as justification for violating Americans' constitutional rights than we can count. And the government still persists in utilizing anti-drug policy to invade our privacy.
This is clearly a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Oh, tell me about it.
And this is clearly a violation of our Fourth Amendment.
Yes.
But more to the point, it's not going to solve anything.
No.
Because people who are abusing prescription drugs usually aren't getting them from their doctors and their pharmacies.
No.
They're basically buying them from the street dealers who are stealing them off the trucks. And so like NSA and TSA and all the rest of these agencies, it's going to intrude on our private lives, cost a lot of money, cause a lot of interference and inconvenience, and accomplish absolutely nothing of any value whatsoever.
But here's the full force of the Obama administration in play.
Yes.
Specifically, the agency is battling to get access to databases in Oregon that contain health files of around 1 million state residents. And the DEA has claimed for years that under federal law, it has the authority to access the state's prescription drug monitor program using only what's called an administrative subpoena. Unilaterally issued orders that don't require showing a probable cause before a court because, like what's required to obtain a warrant. And in 2012, the state of Oregon sued the DEA to prevent it from enforcing the subpoenas to snoop around in its drug registry. And the district court at that time ruled in favor of the state that prescription data is covered by the Fourth Amendment's protection against unlawful search and seizure. But the DEA wasn't going to stop there. It appealed the ruling to the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Fran and has been fighting tooth and nail ever since to access Oregon's files on its own terms. Now, this is a very, very dangerous precedent because if they can get Florida to tumble on this, to take a fall on it, in Oregon, yes, that's going to happen in every state of the union. And that's going to mean every time you go to an examining room, there will be a third entity in the exam room with you. It's invisible. It's you, your doctor, and the DEA.
And again,
yeah,
what do they hope to accomplish except part of this boil the frog erosion of our right to privacy?
Yeah.
Because, again, people who are abusing prescription drugs, they're getting them from street dealers, or they're getting them from unethical doctors who aren't going to report to the database.
Yeah.
It's just another grab for the totalitarian, let's watch everybody. And again, just like with the NSA, it's going to be a mass of data out of which they're not going to be able to come up with nothing usable.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, okay, there's the music here. There's no purpose to it. It's just government wanting to expand itself, expand its power, expand its budget. This is what it is. Oh, well, now we're monitoring all the prescriptions. We have to have more money. All right, there's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here. Got a bunch of stuff we got to do this afternoon. We'll be back Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, share what you know with everyone you know, little bit at a time. Be gentle.
Small bites.
Small bites. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.